Hey, welcome back, everybody. This is the Doc and Lefty program. We are talking about the two big Supreme Court decisions that came down the last week, and we're going to get into the big one, the one that has been a long time in the works. It's been a long time coming. It's also probably one of the most forecasted decisions. Obergefell v. Hodges saying that there's a fundamental right, or reaffirming the fundamental right to marriage and saying that same-sex couples across the country have that fundamental right, and so making bans on same-sex marriage statewide unconstitutional on their face. It's a big one. That was a big one. I typically look at the Supreme Court with a little bit of ambivalence. It's fun to read the decisions, but very few. It is not very often, once a generation or so, where a pivotal decision gets handed down. Brown v. Board of Education, Roe v. Wade, Obergefell v. Hodges. And to be alive and to be politically aware and to have it go the way that you think it should go was a very big deal for not just me, but for same-sex couples across the country, for friends of mine who have been in committed relationships for a long time, who now maybe they don't want to get married, but at least the country is recognizing that they have a choice. And the decision was beautiful. Anthony Kennedy, who writes so eloquently about the dignity of people under the law, was very, very pointed in his language, was very ever just as articulate, but just almost poetic about the history of marriage as he related it in the decision, and how same-sex couples participate in that history, and the effects that has on their children and their communities, and how true, real equality under the law needs to happen for these folks. I read the whole thing. I didn't read any of the dissents. I kind of cherry-picked some of the more hysterical quotes that came out of the four dissents, but I read the whole majority opinion, and I just got to say that the substantive due process analysis and the equal protection analysis, and I won't get into what the difference between those two and what it means. They're just, suffice to say, they both come from the 14th Amendment. It was it was tight, but he meshed them together, and it was a really cool thing to see. It listed as a fundamental right, rather than what Iowa did. There's a distinction between Varnum v. Breen in this decision. In Iowa, same-sex marriage was specifically not enumerated as a fundamental right of the Iowa Constitution. Judge Cady avoided that basically by saying it doesn't even pass our rational basis test. We can't think of any good reason why these bans would be in place, but we're going to decline to declare it a fundamental right, which, it's worked for Iowa since 2009, and I can't wait to see folks get married and be happy, and then get divorced and come to my office. I had to throw
absolutely.
that last cynical thing in there. But
I'm glad you beat me to it, because I was going to. Hey, listen, if the gays want to enjoy the same kind of bliss the rest of us do, you knock yourselves out.
Yeah, no,
one of the
cool.
things. Well, one of the things about the gay marriage decision, it was closer than the Obamacare one.
Yep, 5-4, about what you'd expect.
Yeah, the issues seem to boil down for the dissent of. Most of the dissenters really didn't have an opinion one way or another on gay marriage, but they did have an opinion of federal jurisdiction versus state rights. And Robert said that, Scalia, I'm reading it now, Scalia, both of them are talking about, well, hold on, we don't think it's our position to be able to legislate from the bench, which is, I'm paraphrasing. This isn't what they said. But both of them seem to say, well, really, this means to reside in a handful of the legislators that people elect, and they don't think that it's really something else. Roberts also brought up my next point, which is, at what point does marriage equality end? I mean, at what point do you draw that line and say, well, all right, you can't do that? Now, we've talked before about this, and, there's some practical things. Children can't give consent, so you can't marry a child. Mm-hmm. You can't marry a goat or whatever else. Mm-hmm. But, we're talking about plural marriage. I mean, that Cody Brown guy with all the wives, suddenly those are going to be a whole lot of suits. Well, hold on. If the gays can do it, how come we can't? The other thing that is starting to become what I view as a real problem, particularly in the psychiatric community, is this thing called genetic sexual attraction, which is people that are related developing relationships and getting married, even though they know that they're genetically related. Mm-hmm. I mean, they know this. And so at what point do you go, well, all right, you can marry your brother. You can have father can marry his daughter. His, son can marry his mom, and all that. And I understand, there are precedents historically to do this, but at what point do you go, well, hold on, those things don't count. And then with this ruling, how can you really say, well, gays can be married and heteros can be married, but polyamorous can't be married and GSA people can't be married? Mm-hmm. Where do you draw the line there?
Well, I'll take them kind of point by point. Marriage became a fundamental right under Loving v. Virginia, which was the anti-miscegenation case back in the 60s, where it said that men and women, it was talking about men and women at the time, of different races could get married. And they talked about how there are these characteristics, and when it was talking about equal protection and due process, there's something called, immutable characteristics of suspect classes. And that we need, so for example, race, ethnicity, gender, those sorts of things are considered immutable characteristics, and they're owed different kinds of scrutiny before the court, where the state that is enacting the law has to prove that what they are doing is the least amount possible for the best reason possible. It's in a nutshell that they have to a narrowly construed, least burdensome way of advancing legitimate legislation with a legitimate purpose. And what the Loving court said was there is no real legitimate purpose to keep folks of different races from getting married. We recognize that marriage in this country is a fundamental right protected by the Constitution, and we're going to say that these miscegenation laws are unconstitutional and folks of different races get married. And that's been affirmed. And there are other marriage cases that talk about that. Suspect classes, men who owe child support. The Wisconsin case that said that if you are a man who owes child support, we're not going to give you a marriage license. Obviously discriminatory. Obviously not providing equal protection under the law. Has to go. So in his decision, Anthony Kennedy talked about sexuality as being an immutable characteristic, that our sexualities are very, very difficult to change. Now, that's not to say sexual identity, as we've seen, is a little bit more mutable, or it's becoming a little bit more mutable, but for example, my heterosexuality, I've never questioned it. It feels immutable to me. I've got gay friends whose sexuality is immutable for them. And so those characteristics are what kind of are the bedrock of the decision. We'll get more into this after the next segment.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We want to thank everybody for listening. We'll be back right after this brief commercial message, which allows us to keep the lights running and, me and Lefty talking at you. Thanks, everybody. We'll be back right after this.